Hi, welcome back to Christine's Home Affairs. Today's project is going to be a batch sewing video. I had an email, a lady saw a bag in one of my videos recently in the shop tour and wanted to know which bag that was. I hadn't actually made it yet, so that's what I'm doing today. I'm using sample swatch fabric, but I will give you the cutting dimensions for the fabric once I know exactly what size they're going to be. So stick around, I'm going to show you how I batch sew some crossbody bags using the upholstery fabric. I'll show you how I do my production line and we'll see what the bags look like at the end. I'm going to be using sample swatch fabric again for these crossbody bags. These ones here are really nice retro colours. Love the stripes and the circles in there. What I'm going to do is put these plain colours in with each individual fabric. So my plan is to have a stripe and then pick out a colour from here that might go with it and have those two colours in my crossbody bags, for example. I've already removed these from the card and I get a lot of people asking me how to remove the glue or the paper from the back. I'm still working on some ways to remove the adhesive from some really tough swatches, but here's what we do with this one. We've got a cotton fabric glued to the back of this sample and I'm just going to heat that with the iron and that releases the glue and then I can make a start. So that peels off and it will leave a sticky residue on the back here. Then I'll fold this piece of fabric over so that it doesn't stick back onto here and then I'll just continue to iron until I can get the rest of the fabric off. So it does come away quite easily. Once that cools down a bit, you'll just fold that over again. And that's it. So all my swatches have been released from the fabric at the back, and then it's just a matter of getting the paper off on the other side. So on the wrong side, you'll have these big thick pieces of paper. Most of the time they will just pull off. If they don't, you can press them and sometimes it releases, sometimes it doesn't. Usually when these sample fabrics have been sitting for a while, the glue comes away by itself easily. I tend not to worry too much about the paper on the back. If it's stuck there, I'm not going to go to too much trouble to remove it. I'll do what I can and the rest stays in the fabric. And a lot of the times I've trimmed fabric off and it'll just add strength to your product, and usually it's just sitting in the seam anyway. I'll always line these bags too, so nobody will ever know that there's any paper residue left over. So these ones are going to be a bit of a nuisance for me to try and get the paper off, but they're still perfectly usable. So it's the other side. You might be able to see on this piece that glue residue just there. If it's going to distort or discolour the fabric, then I'll trim that off and I'll use whatever I can out of the fabric. That's left the fabric a little bit sticky, so I will actually trim that off as well. So anything that's going to be a pain will get trimmed off and the rest will just be used. I've removed as much paper and glue as I can from my fabric, and these are the colourways that I'm going to put everything together in. So I've got this piece of fabric here, which I will put with this piece here, and you can see they're not the same size at all, but they are roughly the same width. So that helps me when I'm putting them together again. Now, if you want to make these bags with regular quilting cotton or whatever fabric you have, I'll put the sizing up later. I'm not going to know what size these bags are until I've started assembling the fabric and squaring it all up. So I don't even bother to trim any of this fabric up just yet. I'll put the pieces together, keeping in mind that there are bits of glue and things that I don't want to have in my bag. So when I put everything together, I'll keep all of that in mind when I'm putting the fabric pieces together and trim off all the excess that I need to later. Then I'll know what size I need to cut my lining fabrics. Okay, lots of great colours to put together. These should make some really nice bags. And when I've gone out and chosen my sample fabrics, I've tried to choose something of my plain fabric that is roughly the same weight as the printed fabric. I also try to get similar sizing as well. I'm lucky with this. I don't usually get such lengthy pieces in my swatch samples. Usually they're only about that big, but these ones are quite a good size. Okay, let's start putting these together. So I have a blue and the stripe. Now this has got glue residue along the top here. In fact, it's still on there, and there's some residue along that edge as well. And I managed to get most of the paper off. Now, as I said, I don't worry about the paper on the wrong side. And with this one, I think I managed to get all of it off. Now, to put them together, I just have a look and have a feel and see what's around that isn't going to suit the sewing. Because when you go to your machine, when you start putting these together, if you've got too many sticky bits, it's actually going to distort your fabric as you go through. So I try to make sure that there's nothing there that's going to be in my way as far as sewing, and then I'll figure out which way I'm going to put my bags together. So if I put these together like this, then it's going to make quite a long bag and a narrow bag, whereas if I do it this way, I'll get a shorter, wider bag. Now I'm making crossbody bags today. I want narrow ones, so my fabric is going to go together like this, and what I will do is have a back and front with a stripe on the top and a plain at the bottom. And because this fabric here is a little bit longer in length, it'll actually work really well when I box my corners. I'm only going to have small boxing. So right side up, I've got residue here. I don't want to stitch on that, but I don't want to cut it off just yet. It's much more time friendly to do all the trimming later than it is to cut it, then sew it, and then maybe have to trim it again later. I'll place my fabric that's right side up, right side down, and I'll set that down a little bit further, and I'll do a 1/4 of an inch seam along here. And just so that I don't get confused as to which bags I'm actually making, I'm going to pin the area that gets stitched, because otherwise I'll end up doing the wrong side. So I'll just go and grab the next piece of fabric, right side up. This one here has big hard lumps of glue on it as well, which will need to be cut off, and unless you can peel it off, in the case of the glue, I would actually cut that little section off before I took it to the machine. Now I have all of these ready to sew up. I'm going to stitch along this edge here. When I've done that, I'm going to trim off the excess fabric, and then I'll open it out and I'll top stitch along the edge. Usually I like to top stitch along the printed fabric. Because there are so many colour variations in the printed fabric, it'll be easier to do your top stitch using one thread and not have to worry about matching threads, and it just goes really well on your printed fabric. But then sometimes I'll let the fabric do the talking, and it will decide which way I'm going to top stitch. We'll go and stitch those short edges, trim it off, and then open it out and top stitch. When I'm top stitching, I don't worry about matching my thread to the fabric. I'll usually go and use a blue grey like this, which is a Resant, or just a regular grey thread like this one, which is a Gutermann thread. This is colour 701 and this is colour 5162. But I'm actually just using all of this up because I had quite a few reels left over from my shop, and I'm trying to get rid of all of my Resant because I do actually prefer to use Gutermann thread. So I usually use a grey or a blue-grey thread when I'm top stitching, especially in batch sewing. I'll do a back stitch at the beginning and the end, and I have a magnet sitting here on the bed of my machine. I'll usually just throw my pins over there and let the magnet catch my pins, and then later on I can sort them all out. Okay, now that I've gone and sewn all of these together, I'm just going to quickly trim off that excess fabric, then I'll flip the fabric up and I'll top stitch. I'm just measuring about 1/4 of an inch from my seam, trimming that off, set it aside, go to the next one. It's all a very quick process here. Okay, that's neatened the edges a little bit. I'll now go and take that back to the machine and top stitch. So it's up to you. You can either let the fabric do the talking and it will decide which way the seam wants to run. I do prefer it on the printed side. So I'll have the seam running along that way, bring my fabric across and just make sure that that seam sits to my right, and I'll pop that underneath and then start top stitching. Now I haven't pressed this fabric yet, but you can feel it with your fingers when the seam is on the wrong side. Okay, my top stitching is done, and you can see I've used that blue-grey thread along there. And against the whites and the greens and the creams, it actually looks all right. And even when I put the zippers on later, I'll be top stitching in the same colour thread, so everything's going to be uniform. Now what I'm going to do, I'm still not going to measure anything just yet. I'm going to take the other ends of the fabric and make sure I've got all the bad bits off that I don't want to use. And I'm going to stitch down here just to make a tube. We'll be cutting this up shortly. So this is all just about saving time at the moment for me, so I'm going to place those together. I know that this is the end I'm stitching, so I don't need to pin it. Now I need to get rid of this as well as that. So what I'm going to do is trim off the glue and bring this up to just beneath that sticker, and that'll be ready to sew. So you don't need to trim off the glue or the paper from both sides. Okay, these ones are ready to stitch. I'm going to go and sew all the way down the long edge, and then we'll come back here because I'm not going to top stitch straight away. I'll actually want to cut these open. Okay, back again. We will just back stitch at the beginning and the end. Okay, we're going to trim off the edges on these ones now. Now we still need to top stitch all of these fabrics, but it's a little bit difficult to do that with a tube. And because I'm going to have the same fabric on the back and front, so I'll give you an idea now. This will be the front of my bag and this will be the back of the bag. So what we need to do now, take your fabric, line up the center seam there, and again at the bottom edge as well. So you can line up those edges, and then you can either cut with scissors, so just hold the fabric down here and trim this off right at the very edge. Flip it around. And then we have two pieces of fabric to put our bag together, and then we'll be right to go and top stitch. So you can either cut that with scissors, or you can open it out and just lay your ruler over the top and cut off the very edge of your fabric. And then you have two pieces of fabric like that. So it's up to you if you do scissors or the rotary cutter. The rotary cutter is a little bit straighter than the scissors. Actually, it's a lot straighter. Okay, all our pieces have been cut into two. This one has been top stitched already, and I'll take this side to the machine and top stitch that as well. After that, I have to decide which way I want to have my bags. Do I want them, the back and front, to have the colour at the top on each side, or do I want to flip them? When I flip them, for this particular bag here, I'm not going to have the seams matching up at the side there unless I decide that I want to cut off excess fabric. I really don't want to do that, so I need to make the decision eventually on whether I want my fabric on the opposite side to be offset or whether I want those seams to be matched up. I actually like them offset, and I also like the alternating colours on the back and the front, but I might do a mixture of both. The other thing I want to decide is where I'm going to put my labels. I'm going to use my fabric labels for these. That'll be the top of the bag and the front, and my label needs to go somewhere. I'll usually grab a heap of labels and see if I like it there or here, or, you know, wherever I might want to put it. Generally, I put them around about the centre, near the top. And most of the time, I like my labels on the printed fabric. Now, my customers like my labels on the outside of the bag. I've asked them hundreds of times, and they do actually like that. And because my labels say handmade in Ngambie, which is our town, they like to purchase these a lot of times as a memento of the town that they've been in. So that's why I put the labels on the outside. Plus it breaks up the fabric a bit too. The only time I'll change my thread is to match my labels. Once I've done all the top stitching, I'll go and put a label onto each front of the bag. Okay, all of these are done. I'm going to change my thread and then I'll put my labels on one piece of each of these bags. So all I need to do is find the centre of the front. I don't really worry about whereabouts from top to bottom that I put my labels, as long as I have it centred. And you get to know after a while where the centre is of your label as well. Now that we've done the top stitching on both outer bag pieces, I've taken a piece of fabric, which I think I got in a deceased estate some years back. I've cut this fabric 1/2 inch wider than the widest bag fabric that I've got. Then I've placed 2 pieces together. Then you'll take both your outer bag pieces, line those up so that the centre seam is perfectly aligned in the middle there and on top of each other. This part is more important than the edges that we've got, because we're going to be squaring up all 4 side edges, as well as trimming our lining pieces down to be the same size as our main fabric. So take your ruler, line up one of the straight lines of your ruler along the stitching line that you've got right down the very centre, because that's going to be the straightest line that we've actually got to work with. Lining up the straight line of your ruler with the centre stitching line, and have the edge of your ruler just on the very edge of your fabric there. We're going to take our first cut and we'll trim off any excess at the top of the fabric at the same time as trimming the excess on the lining piece there. Once you've done that side, turn your fabric around, you'll do the next side, and we only want to trim off the very smallest amount of fabric from the main bag and trim off the rest of the lining fabric. Then you'll go ahead and do exactly the same for the remaining sides. Once you've done that, you go and take the next 2 pieces, you place those pieces on top of the lining fabric and line it up and cut it out exactly the same way. So now that I've worked out the sizing of the fabric, we want to have, for your lining, you will want 8.5 inches by 9.5 inches. And then we want 2 main pieces of fabric in opposing colours, or a plain and a patterned, at 8.5 inches by 10 inches. For our handles, we want to have 2 strips of fabric at 3.5 inches wide by 60 inches long. If you're going to use webbing, then just use a 60-inch long piece of strapping that is 1 inch wide. From that, we'll also cut our little tabs that we use for the sides of the bag. You want to have 2 D-rings, and you want 2 swivel clips and 1 slider. And for the zip, for each bag that you have, you want your zip 1 inch shorter than the width of your bag. So our fabric width is 8.5 inches, so we want 7.5 inch zippers, and then we want a strip of fabric the same colour as your zip that is 2 inches wide, and just a really long strip of fabric, and we'll fold that in half and then fold it in half again, and I'll show you what to do with that shortly. Now that I have all of my fabric trimmed back to the size that I wanted, all the dodgy ends chopped off and everything, and the lining cut up, I'm ready to start assembling the bag. I've gone and got everything ready that I need. So my strapping, which is what I'm going to use for handles. So if you're going to make your own handles, cut your fabric at 3.5 inches wide by 60 inches long, and then fold it in half and fold the raw edges in and stitch down both long edges. And out of that 60 inches, once you've done that, then you can cut some small pieces. You want two for each bag I've got 2.5-inch strips of my webbing cut out that will go on the sides on each side of the bags. I've got my zips cut out at 1 inch shorter than the width of your bag. If your fabric is 7 inches wide, then make your zips 6 inches wide. Likewise, if your bag is 10 inches wide, then make your zips 9 inches wide. And I've also gone and cut a 2-inch strip of fabric, and I folded it in half and then folded the raw edges in, and then I've just folded that in half again. What I'm going to do is put some zipper tabs on, and if you're using these zips, you want to make sure that you've got your sliders on before you do this step. I've got my zipper ready with my pulls in place. I'm going to fold that fabric in half, and I'm just going to place my slide, the end of my zip, in between the layers of fabric here. And I'll take this to the machine and just stitch that down so that it secures both sides of the fabric. If you're going to use a regular zip, trim off the metal bits at the end there and place the fabric together. I'm not going to trim mine off because I'm not using this today, but place the zipper tab inside like that and stitch it exactly the same way. But remember to chop off the metal bits. Because I'm batch sewing, I like to put all of my zips onto a big strip of fabric. And once you've done that, go and stitch all the way down and then chop off that bit and start on the other side. So I've got enough fabric here that I can do that straight away. So my zips are now ready to be stitched right along the end there and this end here. I don't need that. And I won't throw this out. I usually keep quite a lot of this at hand, and I'll just roll it up. The main reason why I stick with black for nearly everything that I do is that I don't have to think about what colour is going to go with what product. If I use black zips, black strapping, black tape on the edge, and just keep it simple, then everything will tie in and I don't have to worry about having too much bag hardware that's going to, where the colours might clash with each other. Keeping it simple keeps my costs down and it just makes everything go really quickly for me. Let's go and stitch this. Now when I do my zips, I like to run over the section where the teeth are a couple of times. Okay, my zipper tabs are all in place and have been trimmed back. Now we can take our fabric and start placing the zips onto our bags. Rather than having to clip my zips down and creating all of that bulk or putting pins down, I do actually like to wear the expense of this double-sided tape. It saves so much time when putting your zips on that this is actually a really good asset. What we need to do is place our zipper on. This being the front of my bag and most bags opening out from left to right, we want to make sure that we have our zip going in the right direction. So with the curved edge facing our left, we want to flip that upside down like that. We're going to place each of the zips onto the bag front, the one that's got my label on it. And that way I'll know that I've got them all going in the correct direction. I'm going to place my double-sided tape right on the very edge of my fabric. So remember, your zip opens from left to right. So we just want to flip that upside down and center it on our fabric. You can go and find the center of your fabric and mark that and mark the center of your zip as well. But when you're doing a few of them, it's easier just to eyeball it. I've extended the tape beyond the edge of my zipper tab because when I put my lining down over the top, I want that to stick on the edge as well. I don't want to have any movement. Place the next one over the top and take your lining piece and just lay that over the top to line up with the side of your bag and bring that up and make sure it's nice and even along the top of your bag. So that one's now ready to go and stitch. And just double check that you've got the zip in the right orientation and that it's opening from left to right. I'll also keep my pairs together as well. So although I'm not stitching that yet, I'm going to keep that together. And the reason for that is if I had two bags with exactly the same colours, but the sizing was a little bit different, I know that these ones pair up. Let's go and do the rest of them. Okay, I'm ready to sew the zip on to one side of all of our pieces, and once I've done that, I might as well stay over at the machine and then open it out and top stitch. I'm only going to do that from the edge of the zip to the other edge of the zip. I'll leave this edge unstitched. By doing that, it just helps when you're sewing your side seams up later. Once the top stitching is finished on the first side, we can go back and do the whole process all over again. So place your zipper tape down on top of the zipper, put your lining on top, and then we can go back to the machine, stitch it all together again, and then we can do the top stitch just between the zipper tape. With the top stitching done, I now have everything in place, and I'm now ready to put some of the bag hardware on and closing up the bag. I've cut my 1-inch pieces of webbing into 2-inch strips, and I have some D-rings. I started this video yesterday and I had a bit of a mad panic because it turned out I only had 3 of my regular D-rings left. And because I live in a small country town, it's very difficult to just duck in around the corner and pick something up. So this evening I received these D-rings from a company not too far away, but they're miles too chunky for what I want, but beggars can't be choosers, and that's what I'm using. So they're both 1-inch D-rings, but the gauge of the metal is much thicker with these ones. So it's a little bit of overkill, but I'm going to have to use them until the other ones come in the mail next week. I've also got my swivel clips. These swivel clips are a little bit weak for something as chunky as this, so I might have to get some more chunky swivel clips because I usually like the weight of the metals roughly the same. But anyway, I'll stop waffling on. I'm going to use what I've got. With our fabric now, we're going to place a D-ring onto these strips. Take your lining out of the way. And as I said earlier, I like to work with the same side of the fabric all the time just because it helps keep everything uniform. So I'm using the front of my bag. It really doesn't matter. I just do like to have the same things facing me all the time. Place your strapping with the raw edges facing out, and I'll overhang it on the side of the fabric a little bit and place that inside there. And remember to keep your lining out of the way. Grab the next one, place the D-ring on there, fold the edges over and place that the same distance from the top that you did on this side. So I've got this probably about 5/8 of an inch from the top of the bag. Set that one aside, and then I can start doing the same with all of the other bags. And now I'll start using these chunky D-rings. These are so big. So for the purpose of this video, I'm going to use them, and I'll use my small swivel clips on the handles. But when I get some larger ones, I'll swap the handles over. Now, normally when I do these bags, I will go and stitch the main body of the bag together with the strap on the side, all in one go. But for the purpose of the video, I'm going to just go and stitch all of these down now, and then I'll come back and assemble the bag properly. So I'm just sewing very close to the edge of the fabric and also making sure that my lining fabric is well out of the way for both pieces when I'm putting these straps on. And make sure your D-ring is out of the way of the stitching area as well. The D-rings are secured on the side of the bag. What we can do now is take the main body of the bag and bring those together. And if you remember, we didn't top stitch the outer edge of the lining or the main fabric. When you're placing your fabric together, it doesn't matter whether you have the zipper tab facing in or facing out, as long as you do the same thing at both ends. Just do whatever feels comfortable. In this case, I've got my zipper tab pointing in to the lining, and the edge of my fabric here, the brown edges here, I'm going to line those up and pop a clip in place there, and then I'm going to line up the rest of the bag. So make sure your D-ring is on the inside of the bag there. Line up the side edges, and because we've got two pieces of fabric here with different colours, we want to make sure that we line up those seams as best we can. So you can see those two seams there should line up. Pop a clip in that spot there, and then you can pin the rest of it. Go to the other side and do the same. Make sure your D-ring is on the inside and well out of the way of your stitching area as well. And because I've put my zipper tab on the inside at the other end, I'm going to do the same on this side. Match my seams at the top and then match my seam on the side here. And then we can do the same for the lining. Lining's easy, you just want to line that up. When I start sewing, I'm going to start on the lining side of the zipper there, and I'll do a back stitch here, come down and stitch all the way around, and I'll actually do a couple of rows of stitching on the edge there just to reinforce everything. Then I'll come down, finish here with a back stitch, and I'll also start here with a back stitch and then come back up here and finish that. I'll leave a little opening at the bottom there just for turning through later. Now when I batch sew, I don't usually go to the trouble of clipping the whole thing. I don't need to. All I will do is clip the edge where the zipper tape is, and then I can work on the rest as I go. Okay, we're up to the last one. Now, what I should have mentioned beforehand is to get you to open your zip. If you don't do this now, and you're like me, you're probably going to forget. So if you at least open your zip part way or the full distance, you'll be thankful for it. If you don't do it now and you forget, then when you turn it through, you're not going to be able to get into your bag. So do remember to open your zippers on all of your bags. By not top stitching all the way to the very edge, enables you to actually open your fabric out better and have less thickness underneath, and you won't have as much trouble having nice corners on the edge of your bag. So because I've got no top stitching at the edge here, my fabric for the lining goes all the way to the lining side. It doesn't pinch back, and there's a lot less bulk, and your corners of your bag will sit much nicer. Time to take this to the machine. I'm going to start where the zipper is, back stitch, go all the way around, back stitch again there. I'll reinforce the stitching on both sides, and then I'll make sure I do the side seams and come along the bottom and leave a small section open. When I start working on the sides of these bags, I like to have the main body of the bag facing me rather than doing the lining first. I don't know why, there's no reason for it. It's just the way I do it. Check that the edges line up before you start stitching, and I'll start stitching on the lining side of the fabric. Where the little straps are for my D-rings, make sure your D-rings are out of the way, but I will reinforce the stitching here as well. And wherever there's two pieces of fabric joined together, I'll always reinforce that as well. I don't need to reinforce my corners because we're going to have boxed corners shortly. And then once you get to the lining, you're free and clear. You just stitch all the way to the end. And that's it. And remember when I said to you to go and open your zips? I didn't. I only did one. Now I've got to go and try and manipulate this so that I can get the zip to slide across. Lucky these number 5 zippers are a little bit easier to manipulate. So before I do the rest, I'm going to go and open up all those zips. I've double checked that all my zips are open, and now I can get back to it. All the bags have been closed up except for the opening at the bottom, and all that's left to do in this part is to box the corners. Now I'm going to show you how to box the corners, but when I go to the machine I'll actually just pinch the corners out and do them. When I'm batch sewing I don't bother drawing any marks in. I'll use the line on my stitch plate and that will be my guide for sewing my boxed corners. This particular one here, I only want a very small boxed corner on these bags because they're only very narrow. I'm going to do a 1/2 inch box, so that's a 1/2 inch from the stitching line. And when I go to the machine, all I'm going to do is use the 1/2 inch line on my stitch plate as my guide. So I will actually line up this corner section of my fabric here with that 1/2 inch line on my stitch plate. If you want to draw all your squares, you can go right ahead and do that. Likewise, if you want to cut them all out at this point, you can do that too. These are all things that take a little bit of extra time though. So you can see the straight line that I drew on one side comes together into a point on the other side, and that enables me to match that up all the way around. I'm going to stitch straight across that line there, and then after I'll trim off those little corners. And I'll repeat that for both ends of the bag. So you can see it's a little bit fiddly when you do this with such small corners. I'm going to just take this straight to the machine and I'll show you what I do there. So I'll just pinch it out, and this seam here, I'll push it to one side. This seam I'm going to have to my left. The seam underneath I've got to my right. Put that corner there against the 1/2 inch line of your stitch plate and then stitch along here. If you use the same guide on your stitch plate all the time, you'll get the same size boxed corners. So hopefully it's not flickering too much for you here and I can get a good focus. But you can see I've got 1 inch, 3/4 inch, that's my 1/2 inch stitching line, and this is the very point of my stitch. So the seam that comes across this way and down along the bottom is just there on that 1/2 inch line. And my needle is over here where I'm going to be stitching, so it's 1/2 inch away from that little corner just there. I'll use this line on my stitch plate as my guide for all my boxed corners. Rather than have you watch me do all these box corners, I'm going to go and do that quickly now because it's going to be just like watching paint dry. I won't do that to you. So I'll go and do all my corners now. Okay, the boxing is done on all of the bags. I'm going to trim off the ears on all of them, and then we can turn the bags the right way around. Okay, once that's done, I'm just going to go and neaten up all those frayed edges. Then I'll turn the bags the right way around. And remember, I had bits of paper on the fabric on these pieces earlier. By the time you've trimmed everything down, stitched it together, there's barely any bits of paper left on there, and if it is, it's mostly at the seam, so it's really not going to cause any problems on the bags. So there's just a small amount there. It's not going to do any harm. I'll clean them up and turn them the right way around. Okay, we are almost finished. So I've got all my bags turned the right way around, and I'm loving the colours. I really love how these colours have gone together. Anyway, let's get back and finish them. We have to put the slide buckle onto our handles, and then we have to put our swivel clips on as well. So the first thing I'm going to do is take a slider and place that onto each piece of webbing, place that on there, and then I'm going to, you can get a match or a lighter and seal the ends. I'm just going to fold the ends over once and then twice, and then I'm going to stitch that closed, and I'll do that for each one. After that, we'll take it to the machine and stitch that closed. Off to the machine. When I sew webbing, I'll stitch along the short edge 3 times, so I go forward, back and forward. I'll just do the sides once most of the time, and then at this section here I'll do 1, 2 and 3 as well. You don't need to worry about doing the crosses. If you secure it enough at the top and bottom, it's not going to go anywhere. Okay, my strapping's all ready, and we need to now feed it onto our bags. So what we do now is just grab the other end of your strapping place your swivel clip over the top, and then take your webbing, the other end. So I've got the wrong side and the wrong side here. So just make sure you keep it nice and flat all the way. Pop the raw edge on top of the wrong side, and then pop the other side in as well. Slide that all the way. Doesn't matter about your swivel clip so much because you can turn your handle, fold it in half, and then you can turn it around. But you can see the raw edge is underneath there. My clip is at the end there, and all I need to do now is put another swivel on here, have it faced up, and then I'll fold that and stitch it closed just like we did on the slide. And before you go and take it to the machine and stitch it closed, you want to make sure that the orientation of your strapping is all the same. So I've got the good side and the wrong side in here. So that's the good side. This is the wrong side. Keep bringing that around and make sure that the fold that you have is on the wrong side, like that. And then you can stitch that. Okay, we've got the very last bit of stitching to do now, and all we have to do is stitch the swivel clasp closed there, and then we are free to put our straps onto our bags. And just like that, job's done. So let's go and put all these handles on. I am going to buy some bigger clips just to go with these ones here because I think that these are a little bit fine. For the purpose of this video, they'll do. And if I happen to sell any on the weekend whilst I have them in the shop, then that's just a bonus. And that is the job done. Aren't they fabulous colours? I just love them. When I got this lot of sample swatches, this really stood out to me, and I've been wanting to do something with them for a while. So I'm really pleased that, you know, this is what I've done with them. And here they all are. So I've managed to make 8 different crossbody bags out of 2 different swatch sample boards. I really like these. They're very retro looking. And I love these ones with the bright stripes. Oh, there's a circle. But yeah, they've come up beautifully, I think. They're probably a little bit longer than what I would like. The ones I've actually got in the shop are just a tiny bit shorter. I've only had them on display in the shop for about a week and a half. Last weekend I sold 2, and the weekend before I had sold another 2. So I think they're going to be a very popular product in the shop. I did a video a few weeks ago of the crossbody bags with a magnetic clasp on top. These ones here have the zipper on top. I sell both of them for $30. These ones should probably be a little bit more because of the time involved in putting them together. The ones with the magnetic clasps, they're much quicker to make. I even managed to put some credit card pockets inside there, whereas these ones I haven't bothered to do that at all. There's really not much room. There's just enough room basically to stick your hand, your phone, and maybe some sunglasses or a purse or something. So there's not much room in these ones. For ease of making them and for the speed to make them, I'd rather do the magnetic clasp, but I understand that customers will actually want zips in them as well. I'm selling them at $30 each, and so far I've already sold 4 of them. I reckon these ones will go even quicker because they're just really nice colours. The technique that we've used to make the bag, you don't have to use the cutting dimensions that I've given you in this pattern. You can make that as wide as you like, you can make it as narrow or deep as you like, and you can do your box corners as wide or as narrow as you like as well. In my videos I show you how to do things, but you can work out exactly what size you want to make your bags. If you want a zip in the top of your crossbody bags and you want to use this technique, make your zip 1 inch smaller than the width of your fabric. It's the easiest way to work it out. Do you like these ones with the stripes, or do you like the ones with the circles? I think the stripes are going to be much more popular. I'm going to check out my fabric swatches and see what else I can find out there. I've got a lot of sample boards that are just plain fabric, so it's nice to be able to put the plain and the coloured fabrics together again. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I shall catch you next time. Bye for now.